In the final years of the Second World War, as Allied bombs rained down over a collapsing empire, a question echoed through the ruins of the Reich. What was Adolf Hitler hiding beneath the earth? For decades, eyewitnesses whispered of tunnels that seemed to stretch endlessly, of chambers filled with machinery no one understood, of concrete fortresses buried so deep that even sunlight could not reach them. These were not myths. They were the remnants of an underground world built in desperation, fear, and obsession, designed not merely to protect a dictator, but to preserve a dying vision of power he refused to abandon. The story begins long before Berlin fell. As early as 1943, when the tide of war began turning against Germany, Hitler's paranoia deepened. The once confident leader who dreamed of a 1,000-year Reich now obsessed over survival, his own and the survival of the ideology that consumed him. Air raids devastated German cities, factories burned, the mighty Wehrmacht retreated on every front. Faced with inevitable defeat, Hitler retreated to a new strategy. He would go underground. Literally. Deep within the forests, mountains, and city foundations, vast construction projects began, hidden from the public eye, protected by strict secrecy, and built by forced laborers whose lives were brutally sacrificed. Some tunnels stretched for miles, carved into stone with primitive tools under unimaginable conditions. Others housed laboratories, command centers, weapon testing sites, and emergency shelters designed for the Nazi elite. To Hitler, these spaces represented the last pillars of a collapsing empire. To the workers imprisoned within them, they became tombs. The most infamous of these was the Führerbunker in Berlin. Built beneath the Reich Chancellery, it was a maze of reinforced concrete, steel doors, and narrow corridors designed to withstand bombardment. But it was more than a shelter. It was the final stage on which Hitler's story unfolded. Here, inside those suffocating walls, he cut himself off from reality. Reports from the front grew increasingly grim, yet he clung to fantasies of counterattacks that never came. Maps on the bunker's walls became symbols not of strategy, but of disbelief. The man who once commanded millions now ruled over a shrinking concrete coffin. Beyond Berlin, other hidden complexes emerged. The Reese project, buried deep in the Owl Mountains of Poland, became one of the largest and most mysterious. Its purpose remains debated. Was it meant to be a secret headquarters, an underground city for the Nazi leadership, or a testing site for advanced weapons? Whatever the plan, thousands of enslaved laborers died carving its tunnels, their suffering absorbed into the cold stone. The ruins remain today, vast, silent, unfinished, echoing the human cost that once filled them. Further west, beneath the Austrian Alps, the Bergkristall tunnels produced the world's first operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me 262. Here, innovation and cruelty merged. Engineers worked side by side with starving prisoners, pushing technology forward while human life diminished to exhaustion and shadows. Hitler believed these subterranean factories would turn the war around. Instead, they revealed the contradictions of his final months, visions of technological triumph built upon foundations of despair. By early 1945, the underground world he created became a symbol of his collapsing psyche. Above ground, cities lay in ruins. Millions fled. The Reich he promised would conquer continents now clung to the soil beneath its feet. Yet Hitler refused surrender. He ordered more tunnels, more shelters, more impossible plans. Even as Berlin crumbled, he believed the earth could still protect him from a fate he thought unthinkable. Inside the Führerbunker, surrounded by the smell of concrete dust and fading hope, Hitler's final decisions were made, decisions born not of strategy but of denial. His generals urged evacuation, he rejected them. Civilians begged for relief, he ignored them. The man who had driven Europe into chaos now watched the world close in on him from beneath the ground. In those last days, as Soviet forces advanced street by street, the bunker transformed into a symbol of absolute power, collapsing into absolute isolation. When Hitler ended his life on April 30th, 1945, he did so not in a grand palace or a battlefield command tent, but in a dark, airless chamber burrowed into the soil. The underground world he built became the final witness to his downfall. It did not save him. It did not save the Reich. It only magnified the truth that no amount of concrete can shield a leader from the consequences of destructive ambition. After the war, Allied forces uncovered tunnels stretching beneath cities, beneath mountains, beneath fields that had once seemed ordinary. Blueprints revealed ambitions far greater than what had been completed. They found networks for weapons, underground barracks, hidden archives, and plans for structures that defied logic. Germany had attempted to build a world beneath the surface, an empire unseen, a final refuge for a dictator who refused to face reality. But history allows no escape. The underground world he built stands today not as a triumph of architecture or engineering, but as a warning. It teaches us that when leaders seek to hide from truth, they drag nations into darkness with them. It reminds us that secrecy breeds suffering, that fear creates the illusion of security, and that power built upon oppression eventually collapses under its own weight. The bunkers still exist, silent, cold, and empty. And in their silence, they ask us a question that echoes across generations. What happens when a leader is willing to bury a nation to protect his own vision? The answer lies in the ruins below our feet, in the tunnels carved by desperation, and in the shadows left behind by a man who sought refuge underground when the world he built above ground began to fall apart. The hidden bunker network constructed under Adolf Hitler's orders does more than reveal the physical desperation of Nazi Germany. It exposes the psychological disintegration of a dictator who once commanded a continent, but ended his life trapped beneath the soil of his own collapsing empire. To understand these subterranean fortresses is to step directly into the unraveling mind of a man who built walls of concrete to escape the reality closing in on him, believing that depth could shield him from destiny. As Germany's cities turned to ashes and defeat became undeniable, Hitler descended into the underground world he created, and in doing so, he revealed truths about himself that were never meant to be seen. In the early years of the Third Reich, Hitler stood atop balconies overlooking cheering crowds. He believed himself invincible. Yet by 1943, these illusions began to fracture. The defeats at Stalingrad, in North Africa, and across the skies of Germany gnawed at him with a ferocity he tried to dismiss but could not silence. His once commanding voice in military strategy meetings grew strained, erratic, and unrealistic. Those who had once admired him now whispered privately about his detachment from reality. He clung to fantasies of secret weapons, miracle counterattack, Ks, and hidden strongholds that could reverse the tide of war. And from these fantasies emerged the idea that salvation could be found not above ground but below. The construction of the bunker network, including the Führer bunker, the Reese tunnels, and numerous subterranean factories, was not simply a strategic military decision. It was the manifestation of a mind increasingly driven by paranoia, denial, and fear. Hitler believed that by burrowing beneath the earth, he could outlast the bombings, the armies, and the truth itself. He imagined spaces where he could continue to command his forces even as the Reich crumbled overhead. He envisioned headquarters that enemy bombs could never reach, corridors where he could retreat into solitude, and chambers where he could cling to the illusion of control. But the underground world did not preserve his power. It revealed its hollowness. The deeper Hitler went, the more isolated he became. His closest advisors noticed how his worldview narrowed, how his decisions became detached from the battlefield. He read maps with trembling hands, insisting on offensives that no longer existed. Armies that had been destroyed, and reinforcements that would never arrive. Generals attempting to deliver harsh orders were dismissed. chaos. Civilians fled, bombs fell without mercy, and Soviet forces advanced relentlessly. Inside, Hitler insisted that divisions that no longer existed would defend the city, that commanders long dead would carry out orders, that weapons still unbuilt would turn the tide. His mind clung to illusions, and the bunker gave him the silence needed to believe them. The psychological spiral that began after Stalingrad reached its final, inescapable end beneath the Reich Chancellery, where the walls echoed with the collapse of a dictator's sanity. Yet the bunker network exposes more than the personal downfall of Adolf Hitler. It exposes how his psychological collapse spread outward, shaping decisions that cost millions of lives. As reality slipped from his grasp, he ordered scorched earth policies, demanded useless last stands, and refused evacuations that could have saved civilians. His inner world of denial became national policy. His private fear turned into public catastrophe. The concrete rooms that sheltered him allowed him to ignore the suffering above ground, increasing it tenfold. Every moment he spent underground widened the distance between his fantasies and the truth. And it was ordinary people who paid the price. When he finally took his own life on April 30th, 1945, he did not do so in a palace or a command center filled with sunlight and soldiers. He died in a sealed room beneath the earth, surrounded by the echoes of his failures. The bunker did not protect him from defeat. It merely delayed the inevitable, his world end. In the same place his denial began. Underground, in darkness, where the weight of the earth matched the weight of the destruction he had unleashed. Today, the remnants of Hitler's bunkers stand as silent monuments to psychological collapse. They reveal how fear can drive a leader to retreat from reality, how denial can substitute for strategy, and how a dictator's final refuge can become his final prison. These tunnels and chambers show that even the most powerful can crumble when faced with the truth they refuse to accept, and that no fortress, no matter how deep or fortified, can save a man from the consequences of his own decisions. Hitler's underground projects were not merely feats of engineering, they were the physical embodiment of a regime drowning in paranoia, desperation, and the desperate illusion that salvation could still emerge from the shadows. By the late stages of the Second World War, the Third Reich was no longer the aggressive, confident empire that once marched across Europe. It had become a fortress built on fear. And nowhere was that fear more visible, more tangible, and more haunting than in the vast labyrinth of bunkers, tunnels, and subterranean factories that Adolf Hitler ordered in his frantic attempt to escape defeat. The turning point came when German cities began to crumble under relentless Allied air raids. Industrial centers were obliterated, transportation networks collapsed, and the war machine that once dominated Europe now struggled to breathe beneath the rubble. Hitler, once certain of victory, shifted rapidly into a mindset defined by survival and secrecy. The surface world had become too dangerous, too fragile, too exposed for a leader who had built his identity on invincibility. Losing the sky to Allied bombers meant losing the grand illusion of dominance he had crafted. So he turned downward, not as a strategist, but as a maw, driven by rising panic. In meetings with architects, engineers, and military planners, Hitler became increasingly obsessed with the idea that underground fortresses could not only protect him, but preserve the Reich. He imagined vast command centers carved into mountains, where he could direct armies even as Germany burned above. He envisioned subterranean factories producing miracle weapons that would turn the tide. He demanded hidden networks stretching beneath forests and cities, each capable of shielding his leadership from the destruction he refused to face. To him, these projects were not optional. They were the last lifeline of a dying empire. But these ideas were born from desperation, not logic. The more the war slipped from his control, the more Hitler embraced secrecy as salvation. He believed that the enemy could destroy every city, every factory, every battalion, and yet the war could still be won if the heart of his power remained hidden beneath tons of rock and steel. This belief fueled immense, unrealistic construction projects that consumed resources Germany no longer had, manpower it could not spare, and time that was already running out. The deeper Hitler fell into paranoia, the deeper he demanded his engineers dig. Some of these sites, like the Reese project in the Owl Mountains, were so ambitious they bordered on delusion. Gigantic tunnels carved by tens of thousands of forced laborers, many of whom never saw daylight again, were left incomplete, their purposes shrouded even today in a mix of speculation and tragedy. The sheer scale of the work suggests that Hitler wanted nothing less than an underground city, a hidden kingdom from which a defeated Reich could rebuild itself in darkness. It was an idea born entirely from fear, fear of death, fear of humiliation, and above all, fear of losing control. The Führer bunker itself illustrates this psyche, a logical shift with chilling clarity. Originally a protective shelter, it soon became Hitler's preferred refuge. As the situation deteriorated, he spent increasing amounts of time beneath the earth, surrounded by thick concrete walls that muffled the sound of the world collapsing above. Here, isolated from daylight and truth, he issued commands detached from reality. His insistence on last-minute counterattacks, his belief in imaginary reinforcements, and his refusal to evacuate civilian populations were all fueled by the illusion of safety the bunker provided. It offered the one thing Hitler craved most in the end, not protection, but the illusion that he still held power. The consequences of these underground obsessions were devastating. Thousands of prisoners died constructing tunnels that would never be completed, driven to exhaustion in freezing darkness. German resources that could have supported civilians, hospitals, and the wounded were instead poured into vast subterranean chambers that remained empty when the war ended. And as Hitler retreated deeper into a world of concrete and shadows, Germany itself spiraled further into destruction. His fear became policy, his paranoia became strategy, his illusions became the orders that cost countless lives in the final months of the war. In the end, the bunkers did nothing to stop the inevitable. They did not protect the Reich. They did not save Hitler. The dictator who dreamed of world domination spent his final days cowering underground, surrounded not by loyal armies, but by whispers of betrayal, despair, and the knowledge, finally undeniable, that everything he had built was collapsing. The underground world he trusted as a sanctuary became the stage for his final moments, sealed away from the sunlight he no longer had the courage to face. Hitler's underground projects stand today not as symbols of strength, but as monuments to fear. They remind us that regimes built on terror eventually consume themselves. They show how paranoia can twist a leader into believing that survival lies not in truth, but in hiding. And they reveal with stark clarity how desperation drives men to carve entire worlds beneath the earth when the world above collapses under the weight of their own crimes. The vast underground complexes constructed during Hitler's final years did not rise from ordinary engineering or strategic brilliance. They were carved from unimaginable human suffering. Beneath the forests, mountains, and shattered cities of Nazi-occupied Europe, countless forced laborers were driven into darkness to build the subterranean world Hitler demanded. These were men and women torn from their homes, imprisoned in camps, starved, beaten, and worked until their bodies failed. The tunnels that stretch for miles beneath the earth today are not only remnants of the Third Reich's desperation, but the silent graves of thousands whose names were never recorded. Every chamber, every corridor, every unfinished room tells a story of pain, brutality, and lives extinguished far from the light of day. The scale of these brutal projects was staggering. As Germany's industrial centers collapsed under Allied bombing, Hitler ordered entire production lines, command centers, and research facilities to be moved underground. To achieve this, the regime unleashed its most expendable resource, forced labor. Prisoners from concentration camps, POWs, political detainees, and civilians from occupied territories were marched in chains to the sites. Many were already half-starved. Many wore ragged clothes in freezing conditions. Yet they were expected to carve through rock, haul concrete, and dig endlessly with primitive tools, often without rest or medical care. Guards watched them from the shadows, ensuring that none who slowed down paid with their life. The Reese Project offers one of the starkest illustrations of this cruelty. Deep in the Owl Mountains, thousands of prisoners worked day and night on a labyrinth that remains mysterious even now. The tunnels stretch for kilometers, some of them wide enough to accommodate military vehicles, others large enough to house entire workshops or command rooms. But for every meter of stone chipped away, a price was paid in human lives. Survivors recalled the suffocating dust that filled their lungs, the icy water that soaked their clothes, the collapsing ceilings that crushed workers without warning. Hundreds died in accidents. Thousands more died from exhaustion, disease, or beatings inflicted by guards who saw them as nothing more than disposable tools. Their bodies were often buried hastily in unmarked pits, or left in the tunnels themselves, where the darkness swallowed them forever. Similar cruelty governed the Bergkristall tunnels in Austria, where forced laborers were compelled to build underground factories for the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. The irony was tragic. In these tunnels, some of the most advanced machines of the era were assembled by people treated with medieval brutality. Engineers sketched blueprints by lamplight, while prisoners dragged heavy machinery through narrow corridors, collapsing under the strain. Many worked until their hands bled, until their muscles trembled, until the guards shot them for failing to stand. In these lightless caverns, innovation and suffering existed side by side, steel frames rising above bodies too weak to carry them. Even the construction of the Führer bunker, though less deadly than the mountain tunnels, depended on forced labor. Men transported concrete slabs and steel reinforcements through the ruins of Berlin while bombs fell overhead. They did so under threats, surrounded by SS overseers who believed human life had no value beyond what it could contribute to Hitler's survival. The bunker, that would later witness the dictator's final days, was built on the backs of those who never had the chance to see freedom again. For Hitler, these hidden fortresses symbolized strength and defiance. For the workers entombed inside them, they symbolized only despair. Many prisoners later said that they preferred the risk of open camps to the nightmare of underground work. In the tunnels, there was no sunlight, no air, no escape. Men collapsed and were forgotten. Women were worked until they could not walk, then replaced. Entire work groups disappeared in cave-ins that were never reported. The earth swallowed them without ceremony, without compassion, without memory. And yet despite this suffering, despite the thousands of lives sacrificed, the underground projects failed to deliver what Hitler demanded. Factories built with such pain produced only a fraction of what he had envisioned. Weapons assembled in darkness could not reverse the certainty of defeat. The vast tunnels remained unfinished, echoing only with the sounds of dripping water and fading footsteps when the war ended. The lives taken there had been spent in vain, consumed by a dictator's fantasies. When Allied forces liberated these sites, they were horrified. They found stacks of bodies, bones mixed with rubble, starving survivors unable to walk, and tunnels filled with equipment abandoned mid-construction. The silence inside these chambers revealed everything the regime tried to hide. The underground world Hitler built was not a fortress of strength, it was a graveyard. It was the underside of the Reich, the part of history buried because it contradicted the myth of German greatness Hitler tried to create. The truth lay in the darkness. The Reich was Sioux, stained not by glory or loyalty, but by cruelty, exploitation, and the systematic destruction of human life. Today, walking through these tunnels feels like stepping into a tomb. The walls still bear the marks of tools. The chambers remain cold, unfinished, and haunted. Visitors speak softly because the past, even in silence, feels present. These spaces remind us that beneath the surface of every regime built on oppression lies a hidden world where the cost of ambition is paid by the innocent. Hitler's underground projects do not stand as monuments to power, but as warnings. Warnings about what happens when a leader pursues victory at any cost, when human life becomes a resource, and when suffering is buried to protect the illusions of those in command. The Führer bunker, buried deep beneath the ruins of Berlin, became more than a shelter in the final months of the Second World War. It became Adolf Hitler's final prison, a concrete labyrinth where illusion replaced strategy and denial consumed reality. Inside those narrow rooms, beneath meters of reinforced steel and concrete, the man who once commanded millions now stood alone with maps that no longer matched the war outside, armies that no longer existed, and a future that had already slipped beyond his grasp. It was in this underground fortress that Hitler's world shrank to its smallest point, collapsing inward until only fear, rage, and delusion remained. By early 1945, Berlin was no longer the capital of a mighty empire. It was a burning skeleton of a city, torn open by bombs, its people starving, its streets filled with rubble and terror. Above ground, the Third Reich was gasping its final breaths. But below ground, Hitler clung to the bunker as if it were the last piece of reality he could control. What he did not realize, perhaps what he refused to realize, was that every step he took into the bunker brought him deeper into isolation, deeper into fantasy, and deeper into a psychological abyss from which he would never return. The bunker itself was a strange creation, part military headquarters, part fortress, part tomb. Its air was thick with dust, stale smoke, and the muffled echoes of distant artillery. The corridors were dim, lit by artificial lamps that offered no warmth. The rooms were cramped and slightly damp, filled with maps, telephones, and nervous staff who knew the end was approaching. Outside, Berlin was collapsing. Inside, Hitler's world became narrower with every passing day. He had once spoken to crowds of hundreds of thousands from grand balconies. Now he held meetings in a sealed room with a handful of generals who no longer believed in victory. He once dictated the fate of nations with a single order. Now he pored over maps showing imaginary divisions, tracing counterattacks that could never materialize. To watch him in the bunker was to witness the complete unraveling of a dictator's psyche. Reports from eyewitnesses describe a man whose composure had disintegrated. His hands shook uncontrollably, his speech slurred, his anger erupted without warning, only to dissolve into long, empty silences. He raged against commanders who had died months earlier. He gave orders to units that had already been destroyed. His reality splintered, and inside the bunker's concrete walls, no one dared to force him to face the truth. The space that was meant to protect him from bombs ended up protecting him from reality itself. As the Soviet army approached Berlin, the atmosphere inside the bunker grew heavier, suffocating, almost unreal. The staff could hear the explosions growing louder, the ground trembled, dust fell from the ceilings. Yet Hitler insisted that special divisions would push the enemy back, that secret weapons would emerge, that the war could still be salva. His final days were spent constructing fantasies, while the world around him disintegrated piece by piece. The bunker also became a place of fear. Those inside knew that Hitler's decisions, even in his darkest state, still carried deadly consequences. When he issued the infamous Nero Decree, ordering Germany's remaining infrastructure destroyed so that nothing would be left for the enemy, it was a chilling reminder that even underground, even facing inevitable defeat, he still possessed the capacity for destruction. Fortunately, Albert Speer ignored him, preventing an even greater catastrophe. Inside the bunker, loyalty transformed into something dark and tragic. Some stayed because they feared execution if they attempted to flee. Others stayed because they believed abandoning Hitler in his final hours was a betrayal, even after realizing that he no longer led with reason or clarity. For those trapped inside, every passing hour felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were closing in. The psychological pressure built to a breaking point. Hitler's final decisions, ordering non-existent armies into action, refusing evacuation, condemning children to fight on the front lines, were made in a space cut off from daylight, fresh air, and truth. The Führer bunker was no longer a headquarters. It had become a cocoon of delusion, a sanctuary where denial overpowered logic, and a stage upon which the final chapter of the Third Reich played out in shadows. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler retreated into his inner chamber, accompanied only by Eva Braun. The walls around him, once symbols of protection, now echoed with the inevitability of defeat. He had spent years hiding from reality in this underground world, insisting that the Reich lived as long as he lived. But in those final moments, surrounded by the distant thunder of Soviet artillery, he faced the truth he had buried for months. The empire he had promised would last 1,000 years had fallen in 12. The armies he had boasted were invincible lay crushed across the continent. The ideology he believed would reshape humanity had collapsed into ashes. He ended his life in the bunker, bringing the final curtain on the regime he had dragged into darkness. Above ground, Berlin burned. Below ground, silence followed a single gunshot. The Führer bunker, once imagined as the impenetrable heart of the Reich, became the dictator's final refuge and his final trap. Today, nothing remains of the bunker but fragments buried beneath modern buildings, erased intentionally so it could never become a monument. Yet the story it holds remains powerful. It reminds us that isolation is the enemy of truth, that power built on fear eventually collapses inward, and that leaders who retreat into darkness take nations with them. Hitler's bunker became his prison, not because it was designed that way, but because the world he built left him with nowhere else to hide. Deep in the dense forests and jagged mountains of Lower Silesia lies one of the most enigmatic remnants of the Second World War, a sprawling labyrinth known as the WWII Project. Even today, its cold tunnels breathe mystery. Its chambers echo with unanswered questions. Its unfinished halls, carved deep into the Owl Mountains, stand as the most haunting reminder of Nazi Germany's final desperate attempt to reshape the war from beneath the earth. It remains one of the most mysterious and deadly engineering efforts of the entire conflict, a place where ambition, secrecy, and brutality collided with catastrophic consequences. To understand the WWII Project, one must first understand the state of the Reich in 1943. Hitler's armies had suffered devastating defeats on the Eastern Front. The Allies were bombing German cities relentlessly. Supplies were dwindling, morale was weakening, and even Hitler's closest advisors began to sense that victory was slipping away. And yet, instead of conceding defeat or seeking peace, Hitler's imagination took a darker turn. He envisioned an underground fortress, a hidden world beneath the mountains where he could direct the war safely, secretly, and indefinitely. It would be vast. It would be impenetrable. It would be his last sanctuary and the heart of a reborn Reich. What emerged from this vision was WWII, a network of tunnels and halls so massive that even today, experts cannot fully explain its purpose. The scale defies belief. Some tunnels are tall enough to fit multiple stories of a building. Others stretch endlessly into the mountain, unfinished yet monumental. Engineers blasted through solid rock day and night, carving out chambers that could have served as military headquarters, weapons laboratories, communication hubs, even bunkers for the Nazi elite. The blueprints for the project remain incomplete, and much of the documentation was destroyed during the war's final months, adding to the mystery that surrounds it. But behind the ambition lay a horrifying truth. WWII was built on human suffering. Tens of thousands of forced laborers, mostly prisoners from the Gross-Rosen concentration camp, were sent into the mountains to carve Hitler's dream into stone. They worked in freezing temperatures, half-starved, clad in rags that offered no protection against the biting cold. Dust from the drilling filled their lungs. Hunger gnawed at their strength. Guards beat them for the slightest hesitation. Tunnel collapses buried many alive. Disease spread through the camps with terrifying speed. For every meter of tunnel completed, lives were extinguished. The death toll at Rees remains uncertain. Historians estimate that tens of thousands may have died there, their bodies lost in unmarked graves or buried within the tunnels themselves. They were nameless victims consumed by a project that, in the end, served no purpose and delivered nothing but tragedy. Rees was not an engineering marvel. It was a graveyard carved into the mountainside. What makes the Rees project even more haunting is the uncertainty that surrounds it. Was it meant to be Hitler's new headquarters? A fallback capital for the Nazi leadership? A secret test site for advanced weaponry? A subterranean production complex for experimental aircraft? Or all of these at once? The truth remains shrouded in the shadows of incomplete records and the silence of those who did not survive to tell their stories. When the Soviets advanced into the region in 1945, much of the area was hastily abandoned. Construction equipment was left scattered. Blueprints and documents disappeared. Some tunnels were intentionally collapsed. The mountain consumed its secrets. But even without clear answers, the implications are chilling. Hitler believed that by going underground, he could outlast the destruction above. He imagined the mountain shielding him from bombs, assassins, and defeat. Rees was not merely a construction project. It was a symbol of his growing detachment from reality. As Germany starved, he poured enormous resources into digging deeper, building bigger, and hiding further. This was the mindset of a leader who no longer fought to win, but fought to survive in the shadows. The people of the surrounding region remembered strange sounds echoing through the mountains at night. Explosions, drilling, and the cries of prisoners carried by the wind. They saw trains arriving with workers and leaving empty. They watched guards patrol the forests with dogs, ensuring no one approached the site. They sensed that something enormous was being created beneath their feet, yet none could have imagined the extent of the suffering happening out of sight. When Allied forces later explored the tunnels, they found colossal chambers unfinished, walls scarred by drills, tracks for transportation equipment frozen mid-use. It was as if the workers had vanished overnight, leaving behind a ghost city under the mountains. The scale was so vast that even modern mapping efforts struggle to fully document it. The project was never completed, never used, never fully understood. It remains a monument to the darkest intersection of ambition and cruelty. Today, the Rees tunnels stand silent. Moss grows where prisoners once collapsed from exhaustion. Cold water drips from ceilings carved by hands that never saw freedom again. Visitors walk through these spaces in quiet disbelief, feeling the oppressive weight of the mountain and the even heavier weight of history. Rees is a reminder that even the most secretive, powerful, and ambitious plans can collapse under the burden of human suffering. The mystery of the Rees project endures, and perhaps it always will. But one truth is undeniable. Beneath the grandeur of Hitler's underground vision lies the tragedy of thousands who paid for it with their lives. Their suffering carved the tunnels. Their deaths filled the foundations. And the ruins that remain do not glorify the regime that built them. They expose the inhumanity that destroyed it. The deeper the war dragged Germany into chaos, the more Adolf Hitler withdrew from the reality unfolding above ground and retreated into the silent, suffocating world beneath it. Among the most revealing aspects of his character in these years was his obsession with turning the earth itself into a shield, an obsession that grew not from strategic brilliance, but from a mounting sense of fear, isolation, and denial. Within the concrete corridors of his underground domain, Hitler attempted to freeze time, to build a sanctuary where defeat could not reach him. Yet these bunkers, though built with steel and stone, could not hold back the psychological collapse already consuming the man who had once commanded nations with his voice alone. By 1943, the war was no longer the swift conquest Heidel had envisioned. The Eastern Front was bleeding German forces dry. Allied bombers were tearing through the skies above Berlin. The Reich, that had once promised a 1,000-year future, was now beginning to crumble in less than a decade. It was during this downward spiral that Hitler's fascination with underground fortresses became a full-scale fixation. He believed that deep beneath Europe lay the last battlefield that could be controlled, the final arena where he might still shape the outcome of a war he was steadily losing. While his generals pleaded for mobility, adaptability, and realistic planning, Hitler clung to the idea that enormous underground strongholds could stabilize a collapsing front and resurrect an impossible victory. The construction projects that followed were staggering in both scale and human cost. Vast caverns were carved from mountainsides, tunnels stretched for miles beneath cities, and command centers were buried under layers of reinforced concrete, thicker than a man is tall. Hitler envisioned these spaces not merely as shelters, but as symbols, physical representations of a regime that refused to accept its own mortality. Within these subterranean halls, he imagined himself directing armies that no longer existed on paper, let alone on the battlefield. Every new bunker, every deeper chamber and thicker wall was an attempt to deny the collapse that reality demanded he face. Inside these underground complexes, the psychological atmosphere was heavy, oppressive, and often surreal. Officers and staff who entered Hitler's presence found a leader increasingly surrounded by maps depicting fronts that had long evaporated, issuing commands to divisions that had been annihilated months earlier. The deeper the rooms were built, the more removed Hitler became from the world above. His speeches grew harsher, his tone more erratic, his decisions more ached from military logic. It was as though the underground structures mirrored his state of mind, sealed off from daylight, buried beneath layers of delusion, and fortified against truths he could no longer bear. The people who worked to build these bunkers experienced a very different reality. They were prisoners, forced laborers, and conscripted workers who endured starvation, brutality, and exhaustion to carve Hitler's nightmares into the earth. Many died in the darkness long before the bunkers were completed. For them, these underground labyrinths were not symbols of power, but graveyards fashioned from their suffering. Each tunnel represented a stolen life, each wall a silent witness to cruelty. Their stories were rarely recorded, yet they are etched into the stone far more deeply than any blueprint or military order. As the bombings intensified and Germany's cities became ruins, Hitler withdrew deeper still. The bunkers became his world, not out of strength, but out of a growing inability to face the devastation he had unleashed. Reports from the front lines were distorted or ignored, dissenting voices were silenced or dismissed. Hitler surrounded himself with loyalists who echoed his fantasies and protected him from the truth. It was in this claustrophobic underground world that he made some of his most disastrous decisions, including refusing strategic withdrawals, forbidding retreats that could have saved tens of thousands of soldiers, and insisting on counterattacks with units that existed only in his imagination. By 1945, the bunker system that Hitler had once envisioned as a fortress of control had become a tomb of defeat. The deeper he hid, the more he lost any remaining connection to the war he claimed to command. His dictatorial authority, once terrifyingly absolute, dissolved into frantic tirades and paranoid accusations. The rooms echoed with anger, despair, and the fading remnants of a power that had consumed millions of lives. The man who had dreamt of ruling a continent ended his days in the dim, stale air of an underground bunker, refusing to surrender even as the thunder of the Soviet artillery drew closer with each passing hour. The ultimate irony is that these underground structures, meant to preserve Hitler's rule, instead preserved the truth of his downfall. Their walls still stand in fragments scattered across Europe, cold, empty, and silent reminders of a leader who believed he could outrun reality by burying himself beneath it. They are relics of a mind that mistook concrete for immortality and depth for safety, and in their stillness, they expose a truth that history does not allow us to forget, that no bunker, no matter how deep or fortified, can shelter a tyrant from the consequences of his own actions. As World War II edged toward its brutal climax, the underground labyrinths of Hitler's bunker network became more than military shelters. They became psychological prisons, where truth, fear, and desperation clashed in suffocating silence. These shelters, built from reinforced concrete and carved deep into the earth, were never purely strategic fortifications. They were reflections of a leader who could not face the world he had shattered. Within these dim chambers, Hitler's final decisions were shaped not by logic or battlefield reality, but by paranoia, delusion, and an increasing detachment from humanity itself. The year 1944 marked a turning point. Germany was now fighting a war on two fronts, both collapsing with terrifying speed. The Western Allies had broken through Normandy and were pushing toward the Rhine. In the east, the Soviet Red Army was steamrolling westward with unstoppable momentum. Cities across the Reich lay in ruins, their streets littered with rubble, their citizens living in fear of nightly bombings. Hitler's response to this devastation was not to seek peace or reassess strategy, but to retreat deeper into the underground spaces he believed could shield him from the storm. These bunkers, once envisioned as command centers of a triumphant empire, now echoed with the voices of generals too afraid to speak the truth. Inside these confined corridors, one could sense the psychological unraveling that defined Hitler's final years. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, dampness, and a constant hum of generators. Maps plastered the walls, marking front lines that no longer existed. Colored arrows pointing toward victories that were nothing more than illusions. Hitler spent hours hunched over these charts, tracing imaginary advances with trembling fingers while dismissing real reports that contradicted his fantasies. His refusal to accept reality turned the underground world into a theater of delusion, where orders were issued to divisions already destroyed and reinforcements demanded from units that had ceased to exist. The emotional atmosphere inside these bunkers was suffocating. Generals entered Hitler's presence with dread, knowing that any attempt to present the truth could provoke rage or accusations of betrayal. Some tried to argue, insisting that strategic withdrawals could preserve troops and slow the Allied advance. Others, exhausted by years of war and fearful for their lives, chose silence over conflict. In these final months, Hitler's leadership was no longer shaped by military logic, but by the paranoia that consumed him. He believed betrayal lurked in every shadow, that defeat was the result of treachery, rather than the inevitable consequence of catastrophic decisions. Hitler's closest circle felt the weight of his psychological decline. Those who had once admired or feared his energy now witnessed the transformation of a man WWII could no longer stand without assistance, whose hands shook uncontrollably, and whose eyes drifted into empty space as he spoke. His speeches, once charged with fiery conviction, devolved into rambling monologues marked by bitterness and resentment. He blamed the German people for their weakness, cursed his generals for cowardice, and insisted that destiny would still deliver a miracle if they simply obeyed every command without question. Inside the bunker, he clung to illusions of loyalty and strength, even as the foundations of his empire crumbled above him. Meanwhile, the suffering on the surface reached unimaginable levels. Families hid in makeshift shelters as bombs tore through their communities night after night. Soldiers on the front lines faced shortages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. Millions across Europe, Jews, forced laborers, civilians in occupied territories, were enduring unspeakable horrors as the machinery of genocide and oppression continued its brutal work. And yet, deep beneath Berlin, Hitler's thoughts rarely touched the reality of this suffering. He viewed the war not through the lens of human cost, but through the distorted prism of ideological purity and personal destiny. As Soviet forces closed in on the capital in April 1945, the atmosphere inside the Führer bunker tightened like a noose. The distant thunder of artillery shook the walls day and night. Reports arrived describing divisions annihilated within hours, cities fallen without resistance, and German soldiers surrendering in masses. Yet Hitler clung to fantasies of counterattacks, led by armies that had long ceased to function. He spoke of phantom battalions and secret weapons, convinced that loyalty alone could overturn the laws of war and physics. In these final days, betrayal became one of Hitler's most consuming obsessions. He raged against those who attempted to reason with him, accusing them of treachery. He dismissed once trusted commanders and replaced them with younger, more compliant officers who promised victory despite knowing none was possible. His distrust extended even to his inner circle. He feared plots, imagined conspiracies, and demanded absolute obedience to orders detached from reality. The bunker became a psychological cage where loyalty was tested, not through action, but through blind submission to a leader who had lost all connection with the world above. By the time the Soviet Red Army reached Berlin's heart, Hitler's underground refuge had transformed into a tomb of despair. Conversations among those trapped with him turned from strategy to survival, from loyalty to resignation. Some prepared for escape, others for capture, and a few accepted the grim fate awaiting them. Hitler himself refused to flee, not out of courage, but because he could not envision a world in which he lived without power. So he chose to die beneath the ruins of the empire he had built on fear, hatred, and violence. In the end, the bunkers that were meant to protect Hitler from the consequences of his actions became the setting of his final collapse. They revealed the truth that walls, no matter how thick, cannot shield a leader from the weight of history. The underground world he constructed to preserve his authority instead exposed his weaknesses, fear, denial, paranoia, and an unyielding refusal to face reality. And as the world above ground began to rebuild from the ashes, the empty tunnels and shattered chambers left behind served as a haunting reminder of how power built on destruction inevitably devours itself from within. As the Third Reich drew closer to its violent end, one of the most haunting consequences of Hitler's underground obsession was the immense human suffering inflicted in the shadows. Behind every reinforced WWII and fortified tunnel lay a story not of engineering brilliance, but of unimaginable torment. While Hitler imagined his bunkers as monuments of power, the people who built them, prisoners, forced laborers, and civilians, experienced them as living nightmares. Their sweat, blood, and lives became the mortar that held these subterranean chambers together. To understand the true cost of Hitler's underground world, one must descend into the darkness where these forgotten victims labored, starved, and died, often without a name or a trace left behind. When Germany began constructing massive bunker networks in 1943 and 1944, the Reich's resources were already stretched thin. Skilled workers were at the front, factories were bombed, and the economy was collapsing. To meet Hitler's demands for deeper, stronger, and more expansive underground fortresses, the Nazi regime turned to its vast system of forced labor. Men and women from occupied Europe, prisoners of war, and inmates from concentration camps were delivered by the thousands to construction sites scattered across the continent. Many arrived already weakened, some barely alive, and all were greeted by the same brutal reality: work until your body breaks or die where you stand. These workers toiled in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Tunnels had to be carved through mountainsides, often without proper ventilation. Dust choked the air, cutting into lungs already weakened by malnutrition. Explosives thundered through the underground, collapsing tunnels and burying workers alive. Those who survived the blasts faced brutal hours of manual labor, swinging pickaxes, hauling rocks, laying steel beams, mixing concrete with their bare hands, in freezing cold or suffocating heat, depending on the depth of the site. Guards beat them if they slowed down. Overseers reported them if they fell. The sick were discarded. The dead were replaced within hours by new prisoners brought in to suffer the same fate. Some of the most horrific labor took place in the underground factories Hitler ordered built to protect weapons production from Allied bombers. These facilities, carved deep beneath mountains, were intended to be the last hope of the German war machine. But behind the steel machinery and assembly lines was a world of agony. Prisoners slept on wooden planks soaked with moisture. Disease spread rapidly through the cramped, filthy quarters. Meals were little more than watery soup or crusts of bread. Many prisoners died standing up, their bodies unable to withstand the endless hours of labor. Others collapsed and were dragged away, their fate sealed by exhaustion rather than bullets. Inside these subterranean factories, the contrast between Hitler's dreams and human reality could not have been more stark. While Nazi engineers boasted about the advanced aircraft, rockets, and weapons built underground, the workers building them were treated with utter contempt. To the regime, they were disposable, tools to be used until broken. There were occasions when prisoners attempted to sabotage production, loosening screws, damaging equipment, or working just slowly enough to disrupt assembly lines. Acts of resistance in such conditions required extraordinary courage. Many paid with their lives when caught, executed as warnings to others. Yet these small, quiet acts remain among the few moments of humanity preserved from the darkness below. The psychological toll on these prisoners was immense. They lived in perpetual fear, not only of the guards, but of the earth itself. Tunnels collapsed without warning, machinery malfunctioned. Cave-ins buried entire work crews alive, their screams echoing through shafts no one dared re-enter. For those who survived, each day underground felt like a descent into a world where hope could not penetrate. The darkness was constant, oppressive, and suffocating. Many prisoners later described the sensation of feeling buried even while still alive. Hitler, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the suffering beneath his feet. From his own secured bunkers, furnished with fine furniture, electric lighting, and ample supplies, he plotted strategies that no longer had any basis in reality. He demanded faster construction, deeper tunnels, larger chambers, and more elaborate defenses. The human cost of these demands was never a concern. The lives of those who built his underground dreams were invisible, erased by the very darkness they worked in. Hitler saw only concrete and steel, never the faces of the broken men and women who shaped it. By late 1944, as the war deteriorated further, the bunker projects became increasingly frantic. The regime demanded more workers, more hours, more walls, more tunnels, anything to delay an inevitable defeat. In their desperation, Nazi officials extended forced labor to children, the elderly, and the physically unfit. Slaves were marched into construction sites, unable to stand upright, forced to work until they collapsed. Death rates soared. Some sites lost hundreds of workers in a single week. To the regime, this was not tragedy, but efficiency. The dead were replaced, production continued, and the tunnels grew deeper. When the war finally ended in 1945, the bunkers remained, but the people who built them did not. Many were buried beneath the rubble, their bodies never recovered. Others survived only to emerge into a world that could scarcely comprehend what they had endured. Their suffering was overshadowed by the larger devastation of the war, their stories lost amid the ruins. Yet the bunkers themselves still stand as silent witnesses. Cold, hollow, and abandoned, they echo with the memory of those whose names history never recorded. Their unfinished tunnels represent more than failed military strategy. They symbolize the darkest truth of Hitler's underground ambition, that beneath every wall of reinforced concrete lies a legacy of human suffering that no bunker could ever conceal. In the final crumbling phase of the Third Reich, Hitler's underground obsession reached its most delusional form, his unwavering belief that secret technological breakthroughs hidden beneath the earth would reverse the course of a war already lost. As the Allies closed in from every direction, Hitler spoke more frequently of Wunderwaffen, miracle weapons, conceived in the depths of mountains, carved into secret tunnels and assembled in hidden factories where daylight never reached. To the outside world, these claims seemed like desperate fantasies, but inside the bunker, they became the last thread of hope Hitler clung to. If the war could not be won by armies, he believed it could be resurrected by science. If the Reich could not hold the skies or the cities above, salvation would rise from the shadows below. This belief did not emerge suddenly. Since the early years of the war, Hitler had placed immense trust in technology. He admired the power of machines, the precision of engineering, and the promise of innovation. But as reality turned against him, his faith transformed into obsession. He became consumed with the idea that Germany's scientists, working in secrecy far beneath the earth, would create weapons so advanced, so devastating, that they would force the enemies of the Reich to kneel. In his mind, a single breakthrough could erase every defeat, overturn every advance of the Allies, and restore his vision of a world shaped by Nazi ideology, the underground. ND complexes built to house these scientific projects were enormous undertakings. Hidden deep in forests, buried beneath mountains, or shielded in concrete labyrinths, they were intended to be impregnable. Some were designed for jet aircraft production, others for guided missiles, and a few for projects so secret that even high-ranking officials knew only fragments of their purpose. Inside these underground factories, engineers and scientists labored under constant pressure, aware that failure was not an option. The SS monitored their progress. Deadlines became obsessions, promises grew more exaggerated. As the war situation deteriorated, Hitler demanded results with growing urgency. Among the most ambitious of these weapons was the V-2 rocket. This was the first long-range guided missile in human history, a terrifying symbol of the future born in the darkest depths of the underground. When fired, it traveled faster than the speed of sound, landing without warning and causing devastation far from its launch point. For Hitler, it embodied the technological might he believed would save the Reich. The truth, however, was more complex. The rockets, though groundbreaking, were produced with forced labor under horrific conditions. Thousands died in the tunnels where they were assembled, their bodies buried in unmarked graves not far from the machines they had been forced to construct. Other projects were even more ambitious. Engineers explored jet propulsion, advanced aircraft designs, radio-guided weapons, and experimental technologies that bordered on science fiction for their time. In meetings deep inside the bunker, Hitler listened to exaggerated reports of progress and inflated promises of imminent breakthroughs. He seized upon every rumor, every prototype, every theoretical possibility as salvation. His eyes, once sharp with ambition, now glimmered with the desperate hope that one of these underground projects would deliver the miracle he demanded. Yet the reality was far different. Germany's infrastructure was collapsing, resources dwindled, scientists lacked materials, time, and safe working conditions. Bombings disrupted transportation. Skilled workers were gone. The underground factories, though protected from air raids, could not escape the shortages strangling the Reich above. Some weapons entered limited production. Others remained incomplete prototypes doomed by the chaos of war. But Hitler never accepted these limitations. Instead, he doubled down on his belief in secret technologies, insisting that the Allies would soon face weapons beyond their comprehension. Hitler's generals, increasingly aware of the approaching collapse, found themselves trapped between truth and the impossible demands of a leader losing his grip on reality. Some played into his fantasies, hoping to maintain favor. Others cautiously attempted to explain the logistical impossibilities. Hitler dismissed them all. In his mind, doubt was betrayal, realism was weakness, and only blind faith in the underground miracles could redeem the Reich. His bunker meetings became echo chambers of delusion, where scientific potential was inflated into myth and imagination was mistaken for imminent victory. The psychological impact of this obsession was profound. Hitler's belief in underground superweapons became the lens through which he viewed the entire war. He issued strategic orders based on projects that did not yet exist. He refused withdrawals on the assumption that new weapons would appear in time to counterattack. He blamed the German people when these miracles failed to materialize, accusing them of lacking the strength to deserve victory. As the bunker sealed itself deeper in despair, the fantasy of secret weapons became one of the final illusions, sustaining Hitler's fractured worldview. When Berlin fell and Hitler's life ended beneath the earth, the myth of his underground miracles also collapsed. The Allies uncovered some extraordinary technological achievements, but none capable of altering the war's outcome. What remained were unfinished prototypes, incomplete tunnels, and the bodies of countless laborers who had died to feed Hitler's dream. The underground world that once promised salvation became a graveyard of ambition, proof that no amount of technology can redeem a regime built on brutality and delusion. In the end, Hitler's obsession with secret weapons revealed a truth far deeper than engineering or strategy. It exposed a leader unable to face the consequences of his actions, clinging to fantasies while the world he created burned. The underground complexes, designed to house wonders of science, became monuments to the tragic human cost of a dictator's refusal to accept reality. They remain today not as marvels of innovation, but as reminders of how power, when twisted by ideology and fear, can descend into darkness that no miracle weapon could ever lift.